All right, so first question we're going to take a look at is solving a quadratic equation. And we're going to solve it two different ways. We'll try factoring it, and we'll try completing quadratic formula. You could also complete the square, but we're not going to do it that way. All right, so the first step is to always make sure your equation is equal to 0, whether you're going to use quadratic formula or factor, and this one already is. And then when you're factoring, the first thing you have to do is write down your two sets of what?
Parentheses.
Yeah, write down your two sets of parentheses. And now we want to figure out the first two terms. So we got to figure out something times something, and that's going to give me 2x squared. So Clover, do you know what would go in the first parenthesis and the second parenthesis? So I multiply them and get 2x squared.
2 and 1.
So 2x, yeah, and x. Perfect. We have a positive middle, and we have a negative constant. So that means my signs in the parentheses have to be a what and a what for my signs.
Well, it would have to be a positive and a negative, but it can change, so I think it's negative and positive for this one.
Yeah, it could matter. So we could try a negative and a positive. And now the last thing we need is two numbers that multiply to give me 12. So we could try 1 and 12, we could try 2 and 6, or we could try 3 and 4. Which one do you want to try first? I would try 3 and 4, yeah. So we could try it in that order and see what happens. So we've got 2x squared plus 8x minus 3x. That looks good. Negative 3 times 4 is negative 12. So we factored it perfect. Now we take each one of these factors, and what do we set them equal to? Yep, set them equal to 0. Because when you're multiplying two things together and getting 0, that means either the first one is 0 or the second one is 0. What would we get for x when we set the first factor equal to 0?
Negative 3 halves.
Careful, because you're going to add the 3.
Just 3 halves. Then.
Positive 3 halves. And what would we get for x in this one? Yeah. Yep, negative 4. So those are the two answers. Now let's do the same thing again, but let's use quadratic formula. So quadratic formula. A is 2, B is 5, and C is negative 12. So we've got negative B plus or minus the square root of, and then what's going to go under the square root?
It would be 5 squared.
Yep, 5 squared.
Minus 4 in parentheses times, times, I think it's A and, no it's not, yeah, it's A and C, I think.
Yep, A and C. And that's all going to be divided by?
2 times 5, no, 2 times 2.
2 times 2.
Which is 4.
Yep. So we start to simplify that. We're going to be subtracting a negative, so we can make that a positive. And what's 4 times 2?
8.
8. And 8 times 12? Yep, 96. And then we want to add 96 and 25. 96 plus 25 gives me 121. That's b squared.
Oh, okay.
The b squared. And that is going to simplify nicely. What's the square root of 121?
I know maybe, is it 14?
No, not, because, well, that's too big.
That's too big.
That's too big, yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, that's in the 200s. Okay, never mind. Then it would be, would it just be 11?
11.
Okay.
So negative 5 plus or minus 11 over 4. So the two answers that we're going to get are negative 5 plus 11, and then divide by 4. So 1.5, which is 3 divided by 2. So there's our first answer. And the second answer is negative 5 minus 11 divided by 4. And we get negative 4. And that was our second answer when we factored. So there's two different ways to solve a quadratic equation. Okay, next question we'll take a look at is solving a linear equation. What's the first thing we have to do on the left-hand side here to start simplifying it?
Distribute.
Yep. So we'll distribute. So we have 3x plus 6 minus 4x equals 5 plus 2x. All right. Mad, what's the next thing we would do?
You would combine like terms.
Sure, combine like terms. And what do you get on the left when you combine like terms?
Negative x.
So we get
Plus 6.
negative x plus 6. All right. Clover, what's the next thing I could do?
Do you get x isolated on one side? By,
Yep. Yep.
adding x and subtracting?
Sure. So we could add x to both sides. And what else did you say to do?
Subtract 5.
We'd subtract 5 from both sides. 6 minus 5 leaves me with 1. 2x plus 1x is 3x. And Mad, what would be my last step?
Just dividing by 3, which would get you 1/3.
Yep, divide by 3, and x equals 1/3. All right, so let's look at solving now, instead of a linear equation, linear inequality. If I wanted to get all my x's on the left, what would be the first thing I would do?
Subtract 3x.
Subtract 3x on both sides. And what if I want to get all my constants on the right? What would I do next?
Subtract 3.
Yep, subtract 3. 2x minus 3x is going to leave me with negative x is less than. And what's negative 5 minus 3? Negative 8. Now, that doesn't have x by itself. What number is really in front of x right now? It's like having a negative 1 there. So what could we do on both sides to get rid of that negative 1?
Divide by negative 1.
So divide each side by negative 1. Those cancel. And since we divided each side by a negative, what do we have to do?
Replace the symbol with
With a greater than. Yep. So we're going to flip the sign. And Clover, negative 8 divided by negative 1 is 8.
But
Yep.
multiplying each side by negative 1 also work?
You could multiply each side by negative 1, yes. Yep, and that would be the same thing. All right, so next one we're going to look at is solving an absolute value inequality, very similar to solving an absolute value equation. The first thing we have to do is make sure that the absolute value is by itself on the left side. Is the absolute value by itself?
It is not.
It is not. So we got that plus 2. So what do we have to do with that plus 2 to put that on the other side? Yep, so we're going to subtract 2. That's gone. Subtract 2 there. Okay, now is the absolute value by itself. Yep. So now we're ready to split it into two problems. Mad, can you give me the first inequality that would split into?
It would would just be 3x minus 5 is less than or equal to 12.
Yep, same inequality, just get rid of the bars. And now the second one, we got a little bit more we got to do. Clover, can you give me the second one?
If we 3x minus 5 is greater than or equal to
I like the greater than or equal to, but what do we have to do with that number?
Is it?
Yeah, we have to make it the opposite. And we got to remember one more thing, there's a word that goes between these. So when we look back at the less than symbol, what word goes in between the two inequalities?
It's or, I think.
If it was a greater, that's an or. Remember, the greater is an or. Less than is an and. Okay. All right, now we just solve each one. Again, I told you numbers might not come out nice here. So we get 3x is less than or equal to 17, which would mean x is less than or equal to, yep, 17 over 3. So that's that one. And so I'm going to solve this one the same way. Negative 12 plus 5 is going to give me,
-7.
yep, negative 7. And divide each side by 3. And we get x is greater than or equal to negative 7/3. Okay. Any questions on that one? Great. All right, so another thing we want to make sure we know how to do is change between intervals, graphs, and inequalities. 3 different ways of really representing your answer for these kind of questions. So this is an interval because it has the brackets and parentheses. Specifically, it's bounded and it's half open on the right. And the first thing I want to do is graph it. So if you were graphing it, you would have a number line set up. And what kind of circle would you need on the 3?
You need a full circle, like a closed.
Yep, so you got the filled in circle. What kind of circle would you need on the 8? Yep, open. And where would you shade? Right, in between. So generally when you have a bounded interval, that's a conjunction, and you shade between. And that's kind of a hint for the next one. Now I want to write it as an inequality. I just said it was a conjunction. What word do we always have to use when we have a conjunction? Also think about, like in English, what word is a conjunction? And. Yep. So what would be the inequality, 2 inequalities that you would use to describe the numbers between 3 and 8? Start out with x has to be
Greater than or equal to 3.
has to be greater than or equal to 3. And what else does it have to be?
Just less than 8.
Yep, just less than 8. Now remember, the short way we can write that is with the x in the middle, smaller number on the left, bigger number on the right, both inequalities pointing to the smaller number. Okay, so I gave you an interval. That's a graph when we did the shading. And then when we use the greater than, less than signs, that's an inequality. So we have to be able to translate between all 3 of those.
Okay.
All right, so let's look at this equation I already have typed in. Okay, 2x cubed minus 4x plus 6. We're going to solve for the roots. Okay, roots is just another word for the zeros. Okay, it's where the graph crosses the x-axis. Okay, so if we graph that equation, we get that picture. And how many times does this one cross the x-axis?
Just once.
Just once. Okay, it could cross more than once. It could have crossed 3 times if that part was shifted a little lower, but it's just once. Okay, how do you calculate the zeros? Do you remember what you have to cross?
Second to trace,
Yep,
and then click the second one.
and click the second option. Pick a point that you know is to the left, somewhere to the left of your 0, hit enter. Pick a point somewhere to the right of your 0, hit enter. And hit enter one more time for the guess. And that number that you get is the 0 that we're looking for. So the only 0 for this problem, well, I'll say the only real 0 for this problem, is approximately negative 1.893. Okay, that's the root. If they asked for the x-intercept, depending on how they phrase it, some books let you just write that number for the x-intercept. I would usually say you should write it as a coordinate if it's an x-intercept, like negative 1.893 comma 0. But it depends on the phrasing of the question. But the skill is being able to find a 0 on the calculator. Any question on that? Okay. So the next one we're going to look at is very similar to the interest problem we did in class. We have 2 investments. One investment pays 3% interest. The other investment pays 4% interest. And remember, the formula we need to use is I equals PRT. We have a total of $10,000 to invest. And at the end of 1 year, let me add that. So after 1 year of earning interest, we had $300. How much money was in each account to make that happen? All right, so the first thing we got to do is we got to pick a variable, and let's let that variable be the amount of money we invest at 3%. So what do we want to use for a variable?
Just X.
X. Okay, so let X be the amount invested in the 3% account. So what we have to do is figure out how much interest we make in each account and then the total. So let's start with the 3%. What's the amount of money that we are investing in the 3% account?
We could just put X for that.
X, yep. That's the principal. What would be the rate in the 3% account?
0.03.
0.03. And what would be the time in the 3% account? Yeah, just 1 year. So we don't even need times 1. So that's the formula for the interest we earn in the 3% account. What's the percentage of the other account? What was that?
4%.
4%. Okay, let's figure out the interest here. We had a total of $10,000 to invest, but we already invested X dollars at the 3% rate. So how much money do we have left for the 4% account? $10,000 what?
Minus X.
Yeah, it's the 10,000 minus X. Perfect. What's the rate on the 4% account?
0.04.
0.04. And again, the time is 1 year because that's what they said in the problem. Okay, So now we need to distribute that out. So we've got 10,000. Oh, I already did that. 10,000 times 0.04 is 400. And 0.04 times negative x is negative 0.04x. That's how much interest you earn in the 4% account. Now, that $300 that we earned, that was the total between the two. So what would we have to do with the interest from the first and the second account to get the total?
We would have to put it equal to 300, or?
Well, just define the formula first. What would we have to do with the interest from the first account and the second account?
Oh,
We have to add the two together, yeah. So the total interest is the sum of those two. So 0.03x plus negative 0.04x, that's going to be negative 0.01x when we add those together. And then plus 400. Now we can do, Mad, what you had said. The amount of interest we earned was 300. Now we can set that equal to 300. Okay. I could graph it. Let's just solve it with algebra, because honestly, that's probably quicker. What would be our first step to get x by itself there?
Subtract 400 from
Mhm.
each side.
So when we subtract 400 from each side, 300 minus 400 leaves me with negative 100 equals negative 0.01x. And my last step,
divide by 0.01, well, negative 0.01.
divide by negative 0.01. That's gone. Negatives there are gone. And 100 divided by 0.01 gives me 10,000. So in that case, that would mean that all the money was put into one account. All right, so I think, yeah, everything we did here is on track. When we divide these out, we get 10,000 equals x. And x was the amount of money that we invested at 3%. So essentially, when you earn $300, when you earn the $300, it means you put all your money in the 3% account. Which means you put how much money in the 4% account? None. That's usually not typical. But if you earned exactly $300 in interest, that's what would have happened. You put all your money in one account and none in the other. So, yeah, everything we did there is right. Yeah. All right, so last question we're going to take a look at is about a rectangle. This particular one involves perimeter, but the one on the test could be any of the type of rectangle problems we've looked at this week. So we've done some with area, perimeter. Those are pretty much the most common. So the first thing it says is the length is 3 less than twice the width. So Matt, could you tell me as an equation, how would I write down the length is 3 less than twice the width?
2w minus 3.
So 2w minus 3, that's my length. And what's the shape that we're working with?
Rectangle.
A rectangle. And the length is 2w minus 3. What's my width?
Just that one.
Just that. So adding all those sides up will give me an expression for the perimeter. If we add all those up, what's the expression for the perimeter?
6w minus 6.
Good, so 6w w minus 6. And they tell us in this problem the perimeter is how much?
The perimeter is 36.
Perimeter is 36. So we're going to take that, fill it in for perimeter, and then solve for w, and then we can solve for L. What would be my first step to solve that equation?
Your first step would be to add 6 to both sides.
Add 6. And 36 plus 6 gives me
42.
42. And my last step to get w by itself.
Divide by 6.
Yep, divided by 6. And 42 divided by 6 gives me
7.
excellent. So the width is 7. What would the length be? How would you figure that out?
You would plug in 7 for W.
Yeah, just plug in 7 for w. So it's going to be 2 times 7 minus 3. What's 2 times 7?
That's 14, and minus 3 is 11.
And minus 3 is 11. Yep. So there's your width and your length for that rectangle. Please stop.